Coming up, your Brooklyn Nets hosts inspire greatness from one Mikal Bridges, giving the Atlanta Hawks a drubbing. Back-to-back wins, closing the gap on the play-in tournament. We break it all down coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day and twice on victories. Thank you for making us your first listen today. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel makes every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And Doug, there's no way around it. Brooklyn Nets win again against the Atlanta Hawks. They go ahead and get 2 in a row, critical for their playoff outlook. But I'm more concerned about you and me insulting Nets players and then inspiring epic performances immediately after.
Yeah, there's just no better way to do it. The second we sort of podcast about that we might be worried about certain players or that guys are underperforming contracts, that is the recipe for having those guys no longer missing shots. And It turns out, high-level basketball analysis here, it turns out when you make all your three-pointers and then all your other shots, you win games. And that seems to be what has happened for the Nets over the last couple games, where they've shot well above their weight from beyond the three-point arc and just look like a really, really efficient team. It helps when you play a team in Atlanta who's not very good at defense. Yeah. But in general, it turns out that when guys like Cam Johnson, who we worried that about like the sort of the contract and the performance related to that contract, start playing kind of to like the guy that they signed to this contract, all of a sudden the team's floor really gets significantly raised. And that's really kind of been the story over these last couple games.
114-102, the Nets take care of the Atlanta Hawks and really took control of this game in the third quarter. Started out a little bit sluggish, and it basically pops off in the second, 8 of 8 from beyond the arc. But we mentioned guys stepping up and performing well. Mikal Bridges, he was the most recent player that we suggested, listen, you just have to accept he's never going to be that guy that's going to score 35 points a night and be the number one option and lead this team to critical wins. 39 minutes, 14 of 26 from the field, 5 of 10 from deep, perfect at the line, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, 38 points. That's how the magic gets done. And tongue-in-cheek as we may be here, even coming off of the big game for Cam Johnson, the one thing that we understand is it's going to need to be a baton passing for this team, because no one's shown game over game, night after night, they can give these big performances. Really just great to see that Mikal Bridges gets back into the rhythm here in this one, because he's basically been off for an extended amount of time when it comes to shooting performances night in, night out.
Yeah, he hadn't topped 20 points in the 4 previous games, and then he did it once, and he had 10 points before that. And you know, though they were able to get a win out of one of those games, funny enough, the previous one against Atlanta, basically because they got so much out of everybody else. But because when his scoring averages are going to look like that, we can kind of see, we already know sort of what the ending of that story is going to be, right? Because they just don't have enough offensive firepower. Now, he doesn't have it probably to do this. He doesn't have it in him to do it every night, but it needed to be a little bit more consistent than it had been. And it had to look a lot more like it was at the end of the last season when he first came over from Phoenix. It had to look a lot more like it looked at the beginning of this season too, where he was, averaging points in the 20s on fairly consistent and, not critical, efficient. Sorry, she lost the word efficient shooting. And they had a lot of wins early in the season, right? They started off 4-2, and that's when he was really, really shooting well. That had been missing for like basically a month for him, maybe even a month plus. And so that's always probably going to stick in the back of your mind that it could kind of sort of revert back to that. But 14 to 26, 5 for 10 from 3. He and Cam Johnson combined for 71% true shooting. That's just hyper efficient. And if they're going to be able to do that, then yeah, they are going to be able to stick into these games. It's just, it was just such a long run where they were getting none of it. And that ended up telling the story. So really good return to form for him. I actually like that it was both of these things. I like that they got a win without him doing it last game against Atlanta, and then got a win with him doing it this time, right? And that's a good place to be, because it shows you he also doesn't have to do it every single night. There have to be some other guys here that score. So and to have it happen in 2 games in a row is a good sign.
Yeah, we said all season long, and since the offseason, when you look at the way this team was comprised, they're always going to be the sum of their parts. It's really impressive. Just a nod to Cam Johnson here, who gets up over 30 minutes in this game tonight. I say
Yeah.
impressive mostly because he's coming off of injury, not because he's had a difficult time averaging more than 25, 26 minutes per game. 23 points for him as well. So this is in absence of Cam Thomas, as we wait to hear more about him and see what his timeline is going to be to return, you needed someone else to step up into that 20-plus scoring category. Now, the big game from Mikal obviously is the key factor here, but Johnson now going back-to-back games, 4-7 from deep, as you mentioned, the true shooting percentage between these two. And also, by the way, with his 23 points, got to the line 7 times and was perfect. Like, I'm going to double down here a little bit just on this before we talk about the overall starting lineup and the things that work for them in this game. Gosh, I really want to be right that maybe Cam Johnson has just been trying to work through some lingering season-long kind of, mild injuries that just hold him back a little bit, because we haven't seen him attack at the basket like this all season long. We haven't seen him play physical enough where teams have to foul him all season long. To get multiple games in a row from him like this, at least has to be a positive sign if you think, hey, we just need 25 of these kind of games in and around these numbers to feel like we can keep closing this gap on Atlanta.
Yeah, look, that's like not us making it up. The performance really hadn't been there, right? He
No.
wasn't getting to the line. He's not getting to the line at all over the course of the season. And he was dealing with some of that soft tissue stuff, right? Like he had cramping. He had multiple times throughout, that was we're a little bit removed from that. He had, I think, a hamstring issue also. And those are concerning, right? Those are concerning because they're like the soft tissue stuff. It's like unclear when it's going to crop back up. And if it's either something that he was sort of dealing with, and I think he was, because they seemed to have him for a while on this like sort of effective minutes limit that doesn't seem to be as big of an issue over the last couple games either. So if you're looking for signs that it was maybe something related to health or just general, like how he was feeling, 29, 30, and 31 minutes over the last 3 games is like a literal 1-to-1 combination of where he gets more efficient too, not just getting more points, because that could just happen on volume, but where he's just actually getting more efficient. And by the way, passing the eye test too, there's an eye test piece to this where it's like he's able to beat a few guys off the dribble. Right now, look, Atlanta's tied for Washington for worst defensive efficiency in the league. Their
Erroneous, neither here nor there.
Completely stinks.
Yes.
But at the same time, well, you just get to play who you play. But these are still NBA players. And I think even against some easier matchups, we were not seeing this from him at times this season, where he just wasn't going after this. So I think it's probably a combination of factors. If you've watched this team all season long to kind of tell a story for why the improved play has happened of late.
Of course, and against the bad defensive teams you mentioned, you'd feel a lot worse if he wasn't doing these things. So coming up here in a second, let's talk about the starting unit overall. Nicholas Claxton, Schroeder. There are guys that are helping to contribute to make sure that these last 2 games have been wins, and hopefully make sure that they have more wins ahead. We'll get into that in just one moment.
All right, before we get into that, I'll tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. All you got to do today was go over to FanDuel, grab the Nets +1 at home against Atlanta. What were you doing, FanDuel? They got all that and more. Quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA.
All right, so as we continue to roll on the postgame here, we remind you to get over to WeGotNets.com. 5 stories in 5 days when you sign up for the free ebook, all about some of the best and worst moments throughout Nets history. Also, an availability to reach out to us, ask us your questions, comments, and other stories you want to hear. Free ebook, email sign up, WeGotNets.com. Other things I'd like to talk about from the Brooklyn Nets in this basketball game, Douglas, if I could, if you have the time. The starting lineup I mentioned there, Schroeder, again, 8 assists in this game, also gives you 14 points. He's 3 of 4 deep, only 4 of 13 overall from the field. When we talk about needing to be efficient from the outside, it is a game where the Nets only took 32 shots from the perimeter, but knocked down 15. So he kicks it in there as well. But really, the 34 minutes, 6 of 9, 13 rebound, 12-point performance from Nicholas Claxton with the usual 2 blocks, couple steals thrown in as well. On the back end of this game, really, there was a little bit of like a celebratory nature about getting Claxton the ball in and around the basket, which, again, is really critical for this team moving forward.
Yeah, it helps when he has like sort of a ball first point guard at times, and like a ball first / just like distributing point guard. So it's going to be a little bit easier for him to get into some pick and roll stuff, which they've wanted to get into. This is also a good matchup for them to switch a decent amount with Capella, because you're not too worried. Now Nets ran into some low man issues with Capella and some bigs, but for the most part, they were able to kind of hold tight against what Atlanta was trying to do. Claxton's a critical part of that, because he's going to be able to switch out into guys like Murray. He's going to switch out into their guards and wings, and also be able to track back and get some blocks at the basket. I think we've seen him be able to put those bigger games together in sort of like a full defensive effort. Again, like Clint Capella is not a crazy difficult like defensive matchup, right? Like he's going to rim run and that's going to be it, but he's not going to really do anything on the ball. So I think these are the kind of situations that for the most part do line up really well for Claxton. And we just know he has it in him to like put these games together. We'll have long off-season conversations probably about where they should land in terms of the contract. I actually think it's going to be one of the trickier questions to answer about like sort of what has more to do with like where the Nets are and their overall cap situation than it has to do with Claxton, probably specifically, but it has to do a little bit with the position he plays also, because it can get tricky there at quasi one-dimensional centers. He's got more dimensions than like Clint Capella, right? As a comparison, but
doesn't have a ton of offensive dimensions, right? He has a lot of dimensions, but primarily on one end of the court, right?
Yeah, right. So like he's just not a offense first center or anything like that. And I think it does get a little tougher to answer the question, really more about team building and less around overall talent. But yeah, look, when he's bringing it, I think he's clearly a guy that plays with a chip on his shoulder. I like it. I like the fire. I think sometimes it gets him in a little trouble, but who cares? And I did think that this is one of those games that he was just like sort of up for, right?
Yeah.
And maybe just I don't know, the nature of just the game, or it's at home, or I think just sometimes we just see this from him when he gets it rolling early and he feels like, he kind of has a handle on what the other team is trying to do. But yeah, just another good game. And I really like when I see the minutes press into the mid-30s. Like that is, to me, just an overall good sign, because usually it means the Nets are rolling downhill, right? Like I don't know if it's like causal or correlated, but when his numbers press like this, it's usually a very good sign for the Nets.
And that's actually the next spot that I wanted to go here to inside of this starting rotation. You look at the minutes: 35 for Dorian Finney-Smith, 31 for Johnson, 34 for Claxton, we mentioned, 34 for Schroeder as well, and then 39. Obviously, Mikal Bridges is always going to be your high minutes total man. There's no world where he's going to play on par with or any less than the starters in this rotation. But because it comes in a victory, we don't worry about that today. I did find this was interesting just from the high level view. We always talked about, well, this team's very deep and the bench always gives you a ton here. Yes, Dennis Smith Jr. ended up giving you 6 and 6 from a rebound assist perspective, but this was the starting unit. This was everybody in double digits, right? This is only a combined, 11, 14, 16 points from the bench and not a lot of big minutes. Dennis Smith Jr. plays obviously sharp, and then Wilson gets 16 minutes kind of rotated in, but none of these guys were high leverage players. And I wonder if we're seeing anything in terms of Kevin Ollie and just how he's approaching what the back end of this season is going to look like. We often thought about Jacques Vaughn and just not having any real direction or not having anything established. And the player said this as well. Whether or not we're going to agree every single night on who's getting what minutes, I do like the fact that when you look at the final box score, it's 5 players playing over 30 plus minutes. Obviously, there's some injuries here as well that impact it, but you may just have to do this some nights. Look at your matchup, figure out what the best combination is going to be, and go hard with it. Don't get caught in the weeds on spreading yourself too thin with some of these players that, while being talented, ultimately probably actually drag a little bit of rhythm out of a game for the top guys that are performing well.
Yeah, for sure. Tighter rotations over the last couple. Again, bailed out a little bit here. No Cam Thomas, no Ben Simmons. And it's not a bailout, but it's like this has been the story of the next season, where they've been just unhealthy enough that sometimes tougher decisions don't have to get made, or they don't get made at all, and everyone just plays a little bit. Good.
And honestly, by the way, quickly, Ben Simmons is his own conversation. But on Cam Thomas, if Cam Thomas is healthy and playing, the minutes are even more condensed and tighter, I think, right? Like you just see guys from the bench probably drop off here, and he gets his full load because he's always playing 30 plus when he's on the court.
Yeah, for sure. Right. So yeah, you're probably right. Like, and it's hard to know exactly who drops off there. It's going to be DSJ. It's going to be Lonnie Walker. Like it's hard to know, but in general, it does feel like they, at least with this group, have a pretty clear feel and idea about who's going to be playing and around how much it is. I mean, this more resembles like a steady NBA rotation. Like these minutes distributions are, I hate to say the word normal, but they're they're more normal. Like and by the way, they make a lot more sense too, because after this, it's like you're not probably clamoring for any of these guys behind them on the bench to get significant minutes. And if anything, Lonnie Walker probably played a few fewer minutes than normal. He didn't like totally have it, only played 11 minutes when it was all said and done. But I think in general, this is probably what we're signed up for going forward. And I'm mostly okay with it. Like Jalen Wilson, wing off the bench, great. DSJ, okay, I know that it's the kind of jury's probably still out there, but there are some things he does well. Lonnie Walker, I think we'll see those minutes spike a little bit more here and there. And then when Claxton plays more, it's just going to mean Sharp plays less. And I think that that's usually probably pretty fine too, because Claxton was playing pretty well, right? So I don't think like nothing really rings as standing out as weird in this situation. And it does look like they're saying to themselves, okay, hey, look, this is the group. We have to win. Like, this is just what we're going to do. And lucky for them, or just because it's the group that it is, that it has worked out over the last couple of games.
Right. Yeah. I was going to say the other thing is because it's working, then it looks good. We said this plenty of times. It's always going to be results oriented when it comes to this stuff. If you played maximum minutes with these 5 guys in the starting rotation and the Nets lost by 6 or 7 or 20 in this game, you go, what were they doing? Why weren't they utilizing the value of the bench? And I think just going forward here, that's what I am curious about, whether it's the injuries or whether it is that Ollie is trying to tighten up things based on what he's seeing on the court. How flexible will you be, right? We talk about when will you pull the rope on somebody if you need to? When will you go to a guy on the bench? Those things are going to be fascinating to me as we look forward on this schedule here. Obviously, this win tonight, the Nets got the victory. They closed themselves to just 2 back from the Atlanta Hawks here for that last play-in spot. Let's talk a little bit coming up here in a second about that playoff situation, about the remaining strength of schedule for not only the Nets and the Hawks, but why not? Let's throw Chicago in the mix there as well as we get all too bullish on Brooklyn going forward. We'll get into that here in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, I'll tell you about our friends over at PrizePicks. It's demon time on PrizePicks, where you can win up to 100 times your money. You heard me right on that one. With as few as 4 correct picks, you can turn $10 into 1,000. Demons and Goblins are the newest and most exciting way to play at PrizePicks. You got squares marked with red demons or green goblins. They're going to give you different payouts that you'll see there on the site. You can win up to 100 times your money with just as few as 4 correct picks. And all you're doing on PrizePicks is you're going more or less on those PrizePicks projections. For NBA, it's points, rebounds, assists, blocks, steals. We've got MLB right around the corner. You can combine different sports, so it's not just like you have to make your picks all within one sport. Take a couple NBA guys, take a couple MLB guys when it comes around. It's all there for you on PrizePicks. They got the injury insurance policy. They got quick withdrawals, promotions all the time. PrizePicks has just made daily fantasy really, really easy. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedon. Use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/lockedonnba. Use that code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
All right, so as we wrap up the Locked On Nets podcast episode, post-game edition, 114-102, the Nets beat the Atlanta Hawks. They continue to close the gap here, just 2 games back in the standings now on Atlanta. First and foremost here, let's just talk about what's in front of them, Doug, going forward. And actually also, we should update one key injury note here when it came to Ben Simmons. He was questionable coming into this game. Then he ended up being downgraded to out, but they referenced it as being knee soreness. Now, whether or not that's tied to the overall leg soreness, like it just had to take the aside.
Well, your knee's part of your leg, so I would say it's probably
the same category. Yeah, I know, but of course, only Ben Simmons could give you only Ben Simmons injury update, not him, but only a Ben Simmons injury update could come with just enough of a wrinkle for you to go, huh? Well, I guess we'll see if that's something different or not. And so Ben Simmons was unavailable today for this game. That being the case, there's no need for follow up there. Obviously, strength of schedule wise. The Atlanta Hawks now going forward have the 10th toughest remaining strength of schedule. They'll see a team like Boston 2 more times. They have Denver on their schedule. They have the Bucks on their schedule. They have the Timberwolves. They have the Nuggets. Like, they are going to have several really tough matchups here going forward, while the Brooklyn Nets sit here currently with the 4th easiest going forward. That's why these 2 games matter. We said it coming into it. If you lost either one of them, it would have made it really hard to look at it going forward and think about closing a 3-game gap. Being 2 games back and having some real winnable matchups going forward, it's not hard to start to round yourself back into. The Nets can fight themselves forward here and at least make this interesting down the stretch.
And by the way, these strength of schedule things are sometimes they have to do a little bit of like a closer look on them because they mostly go off of remaining strength of schedule based on win percentage. But
Right.
if you look at the Nets, like they also have Philly twice, and Philly definitely looks better off of strength of schedule because when Embiid was playing, like
Yep.
that matchup is significantly easier now without Embiid, right? So like those, because like if you look at like if you can like Tankathon, there's a few places where you can look at this. It'll rank these teams, and it actually ranks Philly as one of the harder matchups. We're like, well, that's not true. Embiid's not around, right? So that is an easier matchup. And then with the Hawks side of things, it goes the other direction because oh no, sorry, no, never mind. It was just that one. So in general, I still think that they have a pretty this is a pretty tough hill to climb, I
Sure.
think, right? Like it helps to own the season series for sure. It helps big to hold the season series. And then I do think that the schedule helps them also. No Trae Young, that's going to hurt the Hawks also. Like there are things lined up here where they could and maybe just should be able to leapfrog them at some
Right.
point, but they just again they dug themselves such a hole. Like it's more about that. It's just really the hole they dug and being able to climb up out of it more than like what they have going the rest of the season. All the other things line up really well for them. It's just they suck so bad for so long that
You can't go 7-20 over a 27 game stretch
no.
and not find yourself.
I
In a
mean,
bit
they
of a
were horrible. They were horrible. They
spot.
were like the worst team in the NBA, the worst team in the NBA for a long stretch.
Yeah.
And you just can't do that and realistically be able to pin playoff hopes. It's just those two things don't usually go together. That being said, if you look at the criteria here, like they probably should make it. But yeah.
No, and this is the fascinating thing. The reason why I mentioned the Bulls, not because the Nets, who are 4 games back of them, they're not going to catch the Chicago Bulls. The Chicago Bulls have a not very, but a relatively easy strength of schedule. They have the 7th easiest remaining schedule. But what is really nice and in favor of the Brooklyn Nets is that they have the Atlanta Hawks and Chicago still one more meeting on their ledger. So if you like, do you do like the simple math, or at least the way I look at it, it's like, look at all the toughest games that Atlanta's going to play. They have 8 of those on the docket. They have 7 really easy ones, but one of them are easier matchups, but one of them is considered to be Chicago. So just flip that. Have them lose that one game and have the Nets basically pick up one of those Philly games, like you mentioned. They're not the same team without Embiid. If you can split that series, there you go. And by the way, the other thing the Nets accomplished in winning both of these games was winning the season series. So that can play a factor down the stretch here against Atlanta as well. So basically, like you're trying to drive this hard bargain to get to being tied with Atlanta, not even necessarily needing to be ahead of them, clear cut inside of the standings as well. So, I mean, it makes it, first of all, classic Brooklyn Nets, like dialing you all the way down
Totally.
and up
Yeah.
over the course of this season. But it also makes it for a really exciting last 25-ish games, I think we're down to now. And when you think about Atlanta, that Chicago matchup, that comes that'll be next month, beginning of next month. So we'll have like, when that game gets circled, we'll probably be looking at it and saying, oh, Chicago wins, and the Nets may have gotten themselves right where they need to be able to control their own destiny. And I'd love to see that be the case. After everything is said and done, I would love to see the Nets be ahead of Atlanta and have to play down the stretch with pressure. You have to protect your lead in that final playoff spot, because then you'll learn something about these players too. Like you'll learn something about Kevin Ollie as a coach, all those things. I know sometimes in the high level view, it doesn't matter, but we're inside of this season right now. So let's find out. Can Cam Johnson keep dialing up quality performances? Does the pressure get too much for Mikal Bridges? And he tells you that he's not a guy capable of showing up in those big moments. Like, I think you can learn a lot of things about a lot of individual players here. The hard part's going to be the Ben Simmons factor in all of this, frankly.
And I'm really not putting any faith in that at all. I think
I'm actually putting more faith in the Brooklyn Nets should go away from him if that's necessary. They should go away from relying on him and say, you're a Day'Ron Sharpe for us in terms of, right, like your minutes are your minutes, but we're going to build our rotations and our roster for the rest of the season as if you are just a contributor, not a guy that's critical to our success, because you can't.
Yeah, exactly. You can't build anything around him at this point. And I totally agree there. And frankly, I don't think they are. I think they're so far removed. It's been so up and down this season, and it's a shame. And it's just kind of, and probably going to be that way for next season also. This next stretch for the Nets is really the one. They have to make hay here over the next 4. Grizzlies, it has to be a win. Sixers probably should be able to win this game. I mean, Sixers are really down pretty bad without Embiid and have not been very good. And so that you want, it's in, oh no, sorry, that one's at home. So you really that one should be a W, then Pistons, then Hornets. Then they get the Cavs, Magic, and Pacers, so it's rough. But like these next four games really need to be a 4-0 stretch. Like they have to be, kind of like to drop any of these games, with the Sixers one being probably the one that you could maybe, coin flip on. And this is pretty critical, I think, to kind of determine where they are. Because if they were to drop like 2 of these 4, I think we'd be back into the mental health danger zone around like thinking about how we're thinking about the team. And for anyone that's, and I feel like someone's going to probably come in here and be like, hey, you're talking, hey, this is just about the 10 seed in a playoff game. Yeah, we get it.
Like, well, yeah, no, I can't talk about the 2 seed. They don't have a chance to get the 2 seed.
Yeah, like, I get what we're talking about here. We're not talking about the championship, but the way the Nets have sort of arranged their deck chairs on what was something that was resembling the Titanic and maybe is going to be able to stay afloat is that, the biggest loss is conveying a top 5 to 8 pick to the Rockets. Like that would feel pretty bad, right? Just like sort of being in the lottery in general, getting at least 1 or 2 more meaningful games here at the end of the year, high leverage to root for early playoff games. I mean, these things matter at this point, I think, for the team. So anyone that wants to come in and say, hey, we're, pinning our hopes again on the play-in. Yeah. Okay. That's what we're doing. I'm not going to apologize for it. You'd be insane not to at this point, considering the context of the rest of the season.
By the way, starting with that first Boston game, the Nets are 3-5. We talked about it needing to be a 10-game stretch where they could go 6-4. They can get to 5-5 effectively. But if you add Detroit and Charlotte onto the back end of that, then you say, hey, let's look at this being a 7-5 over 12-game stretch before you get there. So these are the benchmarks you're trying to cross. This is the way that you make this season more interesting. And you're finding out, you're learning in real time that Doug and I much prefer winning basketball and talking about things that matter than projecting about whether or not Ben Simmons is a part of the organization going forward.
Well, by the way, real quick, and we'll get out of here. It's really been my contention, like, hey, if you're not going to do Bridges, trade Bridges and like reset this stuff, then yeah, of course we want to.
And this is what it is.
Or if at that point, if you just want to sell out to go a little bit better over the next couple of years, I think it's bad organizationally. I'd probably still sign up from a basketball standpoint because it's more fun to watch, like winning basketball. Both of those things can live on the same street. I think, they should do certain things organizationally to set themselves up long-term. But hey, if they're not going to do it, then I'd much rather just watch winning basketball also.
I'd much rather, whatever their vision is, I'd like to see that be successful, right? Like,
of course,
you think is going to work? Let's see it work then.
What we didn't want to see was don't reset and then lose every game. Like that's the worst, the literal worst of all worlds. And so as long as we're not living in that world, I think we can be on board for what the Nets try to do. Okay. We are going to get out of here. Much appreciated. Everyone that jumped in. Make sure you go to wegotnets.com, grab that free Nets ebook. More to come there from wegotnets.com.
Just got to keep your feet moving. Why? Because jogging is very beneficial. It's good for your legs and your feet. It's also very good for the ground. It makes it feel needed. That's Charles Schultz.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.